had a great day so far talking about climate innovation and both the challenges and opportunities as people are working on innovation and creating new products, creating new services. Now I'm thrilled to have a conversation with a leader on the public sector side of things who is at the forefront of working to bring the new technologies into the real world. And specifically, we're going to talk about infrastructure and some of the systems that we all take for granted, electricity, water, telecommunications, and think about what it takes to improve those systems. So I'm David Guilford. I am the head of policy at Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners, or SIP for short, which is a company that was formed to build better infrastructure. And we do that by working with entrepreneurs as well as with public sector leaders and others to take innovations, whether it's a new way of optimizing home energy use or better ways of making data centers be a good part of the grid. And then we try to build those projects into the real world. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by Claire Newman. Claire is currently President and CEO of the Trust for Governors Island. We've had a chance to work together in a number of different capacities as she's been in both the public and private sectors. But to start with, Claire, I'd love if you could share a little bit about both your role and Governors Island and sort of your vision and work there.
Sure, thanks David, and thanks for having us today. I'm very excited to be doing this with you. My name is Claire Newman. I'm the President and CEO of the Trust for Governors Island. The Trust for Governors Island is a mission-driven 501c3 not-for-profit. We're also something called an instrumentality of the city. And most fundamentally, our mandate is to make Governors Island a resource for all New Yorkers. We have this extraordinary asset that really is a cherished getaway for New Yorkers from across the 5 boroughs. It's a 172-acre island, just a few-minute ferry ride from Lower Manhattan. It was closed to the public for hundreds of years and then came back into local control in 2005. Since then, at its core, we've been thinking about how do we stitch Governors Island back into the fabric of the city. The main way we've been doing that is by delivering for New York City residents really unparalleled green space and parks. We have about 120 acres of such on Governors Island. We have beautiful historic buildings totaling about 1.5 million square feet. And we have fantastic arts and cultural programming. Because of all that and because of our journey to tenant the island and get folks out there, we now have close to 1 million visitors per year. Most recently, in the past few years, and I think really core to why we're here together today, we have been working in partnership with the City of New York to create for the 5 boroughs, but also for cities around the world, a global center for climate solutions. And what we've taken on there is really the onus to create new ideas, new things that we can see in our cities that help lead to more resilient and sustainable environments, help with job creation for the city, and help with business development for green and blue businesses that are flourishing here in New York.
Great. Thanks, Claire. And if anyone watching this or here today has not been to Governors Island, I just want to put a personal plug to go visit. My family and I've been going there for at least 15 years, and there's something magical about being able to hop on a ferry and be in a totally different world from Manhattan, but still be very connected to it. So I think a place like Governors Island has a number of challenges related to infrastructure. How do you think about bringing solutions to the island? You mentioned some of the great work that's happening to make Governors Island really like a focal point for climate. Can you share a little bit more about what that means in practice?
Yeah. So I think, at its core, there's so many people in New York, across the country, across the world, who are working on climate crisis and thinking of new ideas. You've probably heard many of them today. For us, most fundamentally, what we've tried to ground ourselves in is how can Governors Island contribute in a way that lifts up that work and does something different. And for us, we've really settled on 2 core concepts. One is, as you just alluded to, creating a center of gravity for the city where we can have a truly cross-disciplinary and cross-sector approach to the issues. So a few years ago, we launched an international competition. The city offered up essentially a $150 million prize. We reached out to research centers and academic institutions around the world and said to them, how can you partner with New York to bring best-in-class research and education and workforce development into this iconic location in the heart of the harbor? And like in any crisis, people look to New York for solutions. We believe that's the case in the climate crisis. So we were pleased last year to announce the winner of that challenge, an entity called the New York Climate Exchange, led by Stony Brook University, but including partners like Oxford, Duke, NYU, IBM, local nonprofit organizations focused in environmental justice, and they're going to be really creating that nexus. And then the second thing is, one of the special things about the island is it's a great place to go with your kids or your friends and have a nice day. It's also like a mini city in and of itself. Because we're an island, because we have the scale of 172 acres, we have 2.5 miles of waterfront, we own the whole thing, including the roads and the surrounding waterways and all the infrastructure. And what that enables us to do as we think about adaptive reuse and new construction is really put into place best-in-class technologies that don't have to go through quite the same alphabet soup of approvals that they might have to on a normal city grid. So we hope that over time, when you come and visit Governor's Island, you'll be able to have a journey through what a sort of idealized New York neighborhood could look like when it is really done with new green tech in mind.
That's great. And if you're a startup and you've got a new technology, I think one of the things that often seems to be a really early challenge to figure out, like, how do I work with government? How do I engage with the public sector? What is a procurement and an RFP, and what's the likelihood of success? How long does it take? And Claire, you alluded a bit to some of the benefits or the scope of work that can be done at Governor's Island. How have you engaged with startups and people that are trying to take a technology that may work in a lab, but they need a place in the real world to deploy it?
Yeah. And again, thinking about how can we use what's unique about Governor's Island, we working with the city and many of our other partners in city agencies, places like the Brooklyn Navy Yard and EDC, what we sort of arrived at is the idea of using these pseudo-city assets to really help companies who are born here in New York, who are growing here in New York, have better speed to go from that idea in a lab to a real test case in a city street or in the city grid where they can draw data and have real user interface with the public. So what we've done is we've launched essentially a challenge program. It has two main pathways. One is at any given time of the year, we have a rolling application process. A business can come to us and say, I have this amazing new carbon capture technology. I have this new solar panel technology, a new battery reclamation technology, but I don't have anywhere to try it. I want to try it here at Governor's Island. And with a very simple process, we can say, go for it. Let's see what you can do. And for us, because we're not a VC, we're not an accelerator, we're not really betting on a technology. Really what we're thinking about is how can we, because of this unique place that is the island, help these folks get what they need from their test beds in a place that also has public interface. So it both has the advantage of helping them move from that lab setting into the real world much more closely, but it's also a place that you can then bring investors, and investors can see how the public interact with it. We can use it as a public education tool as well. And then the other thing that we're doing is an annual, more formalized grant-supported challenge where we, again, in partnership with the various organizations we work with, pick a theme. And so last year's was water abundance. We selected a number of businesses that applied for an opportunity to pilot on Governor's Island as the choices. They each got grant seed funding from us, and they have rolled their pilots out on Governor's Island now. So one of those that I'm really excited about is a company called Ciclo. It does point of source gray water recycling. She is a New York-based entrepreneur, somebody who's hiring locally, who sort of came out of New York City acceleration programs, and she needed a place to test her product. What it is something you can install under a sink or in a building, and it takes gray water and it brings it up to drinking water standards. For New York City, what that means is a lot of the water that's going into the back into the the sewage system has already been cleaned, which is a huge advantage for New York. And in developing nations, it has real applicability for drinkability. So because of her pilot on Governor's Island and the data she's been able to share, she now has a contract in Mexico City and one in Tajikistan. She's rapidly scaling up her work.
That's great. Infrastructure is so often invisible, right? Either because it's something underneath the streets that we're walking on, or it's hidden behind a utility closet. And I think the example that you gave of Greywater is something too, where we all know that water goes somewhere when we turn on the faucet, but don't really think too much about it. I think one of the other unique aspects of Governor's Island is that it is a place that people come to experience new things, and the public engagement is such a core piece of it. I know there's, at any given day, there's arts festivals, there's food, there's all sorts of stuff to do. How are you thinking about the role of like public engagement, specifically around this kind of climate adaptation, innovation side of things?
Yeah, I would say there's sort of two big buckets. One, of course, is we are very focused on Governor's Island and with the Center for Climate Solutions on educational pathways for New Yorkers. And we think about that as a funnel. At the lower grade level, where we've launched and are now running a field trip program, sort of big picture, we want every third grader in the city to come to Governor's Island to learn about the climate crisis and climate solutions. We now have a high school on Governor's Island called the Harbor School. It's a public school. You can do CTE education for careers related to the environment and marine ecosystems. And now with the launch of the Climate Exchange, we're also going to have higher ed opportunities for New Yorkers. So, that part of things, which is a little bit more defined, offers kids of all ages in the city an opportunity to learn on the island. And then the other element, as you said, is the public. And we have this 1 million visitors a year, and we want to make sure that to the extent you're coming to Governor's Island, you also have a learning opportunity. You don't have to take advantage of it, but a lot of our visitors are already engaged in these issues. And when they come, they're coming for 4 hours, for 8 hours. So it's not like in the city streets, like you said, it's invisible. You're just moving through things as quickly as you can. It's a place you've come to stay. And so that creates an opportunity for us to engage the public in less sexy things like infrastructure.
Yeah. And so you have this unique perspective leading a somewhat self-contained city, self-contained ecosystem, right? They're part of the city, but also a little bit apart from it. What lessons or learnings have you had from that you think would be helpful for people that are in other types of environments, whether it's in this sort of New York City writ large or other communities around the world?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, we have some inherent advantages, as you're alluding to, that maybe aren't as replicable. Again, really that we have this mini city. But I think the big one for us that certainly is something that other cities could do is find a safe space where you can just try things out and not worry whether they're going to work. Now, obviously we want them to work, but being able to have essentially a little petri dish or a sandbox where it's understood from the beginning that the only purpose is to see what's successful and failure doesn't matter, I think is a big advantage. But you also have done a ton of this in public-private partnerships, and sort of curious your response on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's words like testbed, living lab, petri dish that get used a lot I think for obvious reasons, because we are trying to take something and see, does it actually work? Does it do the thing that we thought it would? How do people interact with it? I think the flip side of that is that it's, depending on what the technology is, you either have to be okay with the potential of failure, but you also need to make sure you're not creating externalities and a burden on a community that in some cases maybe the community's least positioned to be able to bear that burden, right? So I think it's tricky. I think one of the great things about what you're doing at Governor's Island is that you're doing this in a way where it's publicly accessible, but it's not going into a neighborhood and saying you didn't have anything to do with this process, but we're going to install a bunch of sensors and devices and things and we'll see how it works. Right? I think there's something, I think combining those two of having a place where people aren't necessarily living there in the same way that they would be living in a neighborhood in the Bronx or Brooklyn or any of the 5 boroughs, but to still be able to have researchers and experts engage with it, but also the general public engage with it. And then I think by the time it gets to a large-scale deployment,
right,
some of the any kinks have been worked out, and you're not essentially trying something for the first time in an environment where a failure could actually have real complications for people. I think the lessons that are transferable, I think are not everything is going to be, but I think there's the work that you're doing now can create these pathways. But on the sort of subject of pathways, how do you think about beyond the pilot? Because if you're a startup, it's great to get your first deployment. It's great to get your first paying customer in particular, right? Investors really want to see that someone is paying for your service. How do you think about the next step after these pilots, and how to help companies go to getting sort of a scaling, commercially viable solution?
Yeah, I think a huge part of that is the relationship to the city, but then also the partnerships that we're building up along the way. And so for us, the sort of fundamental question of how do you go from 1 to 5 to 25 is really core to our support for these businesses. We now have formal partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, with the Brooklyn Navy Yard and with EDC. Together, we're working on fostering various demo days and other platforms where city commissioners, where real estate developers, where business improvement districts can see these products, but we also share amongst each other. So we had a pilot on the island, a company called Vicarb, which does carbon capture technique. I think we were their first location. They were selling they started selling carbon credits. On the island, their product was very small. We're talking about pounds of carbon capture per year. Now they're deploying the next scale up of asset at the Navy Yard, where it will be tons. And from there, hopefully it gets bigger and bigger. It's Electric is a company that started piloting at Brooklyn Army Terminal with EDC. They're now expanding with 30 chargers on Governor's Island. And so creating this network is helpful as well. But I think one of the big things we've been grappling with is how do we best position these businesses for future investment or for future scale? And you can tell me what you would want to see out of them so that we can make sure they have it.
Yeah, well, I know we're about at time, so I probably can't totally solve that problem, which I definitely had an answer for on the top of my head. But I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing there, and again, encourage anyone who wants to get involved with Governor's Island to come visit. And there's lots of good ways, I think, on the climate side and beyond to be involved. So I think this hopefully shows that there are, even in a city like New York, there's a tremendous diversity of potential solutions, potential places to deploy new technologies, but that really ultimately it's about serving the needs of a community and then figuring out how do you go from there to expand. So please join me in thanking Claire for being part of this discussion.
Thank you, David.